Today, my guest is Nathan Tabor. Nathan is a multi-talented entrepreneur. He's done auto sales. He's a speaker. He's a multifamily flipper. He's a mentor. He is a problem solver. And today we're going to talk with him about apartment flipping and due diligence and a work-life balance. But before we join or get into the conversation with Nathan, just want to remind you, if you like the show, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. You can do this. You can like, you can leave a comment, you can share, and you can subscribe. Also want to remind you that if you'd like to watch the show, we've got a YouTube channel. You can check out Commercial Real Estate Pro Network and get a chance to see our guest and the conversation. All right. With that, I want to welcome my guest today, Nathan Tabor. Nathan, welcome to CREPN Radio.
Hey, thanks, Darren. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Well, I am really looking forward to talking with you. Before we started recording, I was sharing with you, I don't remember which real estate investor podcast I was listening to, but there was a conversation that you were having, and it was full of great information, and I can't wait to hear more about you and your story. And before we get into the topic today, if you wouldn't mind taking a minute and just sharing with the audience, myself, a little bit about your background, and we'll get into it.
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate that. I appreciate, again, the show that you have. And from what I've listened and heard, you do a really good job of bringing, relevant information to those who are listening. So I'm 44 years old. I've been basically a serial entrepreneur my entire life. I've had 25 different businesses. And the joke of friends is, I've been a slumlord. I've been a used car salesman. I've been a wannabe politician because I ran for office once upon a time. Any other adjectives, those names there. I've sent a little over 1 billion emails, so I guess I could be a spammer. Websites for presidential candidates to businesses. I've owned a buy here, pay here car lot. I've flipped a little over $52 million worth of real estate in the last 11 years. And it just kind of growing up, I grew up in right outside of Huntsville, Alabama, growing up. And my dad was a painter, but he was a preacher on the weekend, but he was always this entrepreneurial spirit. What could he do? If we needed something, if we needed a saddle for a horse, whose barn could he paint to trade out for a saddle? And so this facilitating, that was just kind of ingrained in myself and my brothers growing up. Been involved in a soy product called soy.com with my brother. We sold a little bit over $80 million online in 6 years. So, a lot of times been at the right time, right place for amazing successes. But at the same time, I've had some pretty epic failures of things that, I didn't do the process right. I didn't understand the process. Something that I should have done that I didn't, that led to a pretty sizable issue. And so the last 3 or 4 years, I'm still involved in real estate, and I still have a consulting company in that. But, really coming from it as, where's the work-life balance? If you have a faith, I'm an evangelical Christian, are you honoring that? Or is that just, something that you look at every once in a while and maybe dust it off, which is kind of where I was for a long time. So it's been an interesting. I live in North Carolina, right outside of Winston-Salem. I've been married for almost 15 years and have a 13-year-old daughter. And I love going out and sharing, yes, my successes, but also my failures. I love sharing about how people can get to where they want to go, the processes they need to go through. And so that's why I enjoy, getting on podcasts like yours to meet people and talk with you about some of the issues going on in people's lives.
Got it. Well, it certainly sounds like you've had both the wins and the losses, and I think there's a lot of times there's more to learn from the losses than there are the wins. And I know just a little bit I had heard on the other podcast where I heard you speaking, you were able to detail some very interesting topics or some stories about some different properties with challenges and that. And so I first want to understand, are you actively investing in buy and hold properties, or do you strictly flip properties?
Pretty much strictly flip. That's just my model. People are like, why do you not hold? It's not any against holding. It's just I try to find the, most dilapidated, high deferred maintenance, low occupancy, or completely, 100% vacant, something that, is almost on the edge of probably needing to be bulldozed over, but the foundation is right. It's in a decent area or a good area. It just needs some love. It needs some renovation. And so that's more my market is to buy. I've bought a 56 unit complex before for $86,000, but it had been vacant for 3 years.
Wow.
But it was brick, and the foundation was good, but it needed new roof, new plumbing, new electric, new HVAC, all new sheetrock. Everything had been stripped out, so it was a complete gut and put back.
Got it. Well, in something like that, though, I'm guessing you mentioned that it's definitely you've got some good bones, well located. Yeah. So I would think that a guy like yourself would, if you ran the numbers right and made sure that you're buying, are you essentially buying it for what the ground's worth at that point, or is there a strategy in the acquisition?
It took me a while to figure this out because the normal process, the way my mind worked, and I think most is, we start, what's the property worth, what's it going to cost to renovate, and we try to get to what we think the property would be worth. And I tried for a number of years to make numbers match up to what I needed it to be worth. And so the way I run my numbers now on looking at a property, whether you're doing a single family or multifamily, is to start with what's the property worth on its worst day. So, looking at comps, what's the last 3, 4, 5, 6 properties sold? In commercial, you're looking at the cap rate. If it's sold for an 8% cap rate, but you're running your numbers, and to get to your numbers, you have to be at a 7% cap rate. That 7 to 8% is a fairly large jump. Right. And single family, if all the houses have sold for $150,000 and you think yours is worth $180, guess what? You're most likely going to sell your house for
$150. Yeah.
$150. So now I run all my numbers backwards. What's this 56 unit complex worth? What's it going to cost to renovate? How much money do I want to make? What's my holding cost? What's, any taxes, if you got a mortgage on there and you're having to pay the bank and there's no renters in there, all those numbers, then what should I buy the property for?
Right. No,
and so it's running the numbers backwards instead of forwards. And then if you can't make that number work, I need to pay $86,000 for this complex. Anything that you pay above that comes out of your profit. And then if you pay more than what it's currently worth plus your profit, then you're losing money.
Yep. No, I think there's plenty of listeners and real estate investors out there that have let their emotions get a hold of them before, and you try and make the numbers work rather than just believe what the numbers are and accept the numbers. So that's good.
And that's where you get yourself in trouble. Whether you're a small investor or a large investor, if you try to cram those numbers to make them work, most likely they're not going to work.
Right.
But not going to work after you've bought the deal, after you've got your money in it, or investors' money, or bank lender. By the time you realize it, you're too far down the road. Now you've got an issue that could have been avoided.
Yep. No, I like that the thought there. I mean, buy right is a phrase I've heard, and it definitely applies. I mean, you make your money on the buy, right? I mean, if you
make your money when you buy it,
right? So, do you do this solo, or do you have a partner in your investing, or how are you structured there?
Pretty much. So, for me, I like the complex. Use that the 56 unit at 86,000. It was about a $1.3 million renovation. And it took about 8 months. So everything I do is pretty much in about a 60-mile radius of where I live, because I'm there most every day, if not every day, because I have to hire contractors, licensed contractors, to do the work, but I basically operate as an owner. I'm not a general contractor. I don't have my license, but since I'm the owner, I can direct hire those folks, which saves me 15 to 30% on my cost of renovation, because there is no middleman between me and the HVAC or me and the electrical or plumber. So I'm running these crews.
Got it.
And pretty much, I've had some had some silent investors. I've not had I've had one deal that I did with a partner, but most all my other deals have been just done with me, with maybe some investors who had return a percentage of the profit or some guaranteed return. That's been my model.
Gotcha. So on the 56 unit, and we can talk about any of your other ones, but you mentioned the time to go from purchase to completed. Do you retain it after that and get it up and running and rent it, or you?
So, as a flipper, what I start doing on that is, my goal is to turn money.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I buy a deal, I immediately start looking for a buyer. But the way I do that then is, okay, once the renovation work is done, because I want to do the renovation, make sure it's right. And then I start pricing the property out. Hey, here's the price at 20% occupied. Here's the price at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90% occupied. So, because it does take time. Now, you can fill a complex up. You can fill a rental house up, immediately. No security deposit, first month rent free. I mean, you could fill up 50 units in most any area in a weekend, but it wouldn't be the 50 tenants that we wanted.
Right.
So it takes time to lease a unit up. So in the flipping in my business, I start looking at, yes, I'm going to make less money if I sell it when it's 50% occupied versus 90% occupied, but I'm still making money, and then I've freed up the money that I put in. I've freed up my bank loan to go do another deal.
Gotcha.
So just always turning, what I've seen in a lot of flippers is, and I've made this mistake, is we buy it, we renovate it, and then we say it's worth this amount, and we're not budging off that number. Well, what happens in that time period, actually I've only flipped over 2 houses, and it was a mountain house, and it was worth $380,000 on an appraisal. I had $225,000 in it, and I was offered at any given time $330 to $350 for the house, but I wouldn't take it. Well, the house ended up sitting there for 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time I figured my carrying cost of almost $1,400-1,500 a month, and then the property taxes and mowing the lawn and winterizing the house because it was in the mountains, if I would have taken $340 for it 14 months earlier, I would have made more than I did by the time I sold it 14 months later.
Right. Oh, I think that carrying cost is something many investor doesn't see, until you're after the fact and you realize the mistake or the error of your ways. But it is something to definitely account for. And I know, I work with investors on a regular basis, and the flipping I think is inherently dangerous for somebody that's just getting started. When you're not able to account for, or you've been to a seminar and you've been told how you're going to make all this money, and you find the property and you think you're going to get in and out in 60 days and you're going to be off to the races, and 6 months or a year later, you're still dinking with this project and bleeding everywhere. So,
and contractors have walked off with your 30% that you gave them down to get started, and materials have walked off. Yes, you went to a seminar and learned something, but you didn't really know the process. They didn't teach you what actually is going to happen.
Right.
They sold you a shiny toy. That's good information, but it's not the real world.
Right. No, I shared with you a little bit before we started that by day I'm an insurance broker, and just the different insurances that are needed for flipping. I think people a lot of times they get caught up because the bank or the lender wants their the structure covered, but they don't always realize the risk that they're taking on with the liability and all that. And let me ask you something. So when you identify a property, you go through your analysis, kind of get to the bottom line of what you can offer so you can make your money. What are some of the problems you run into? This 56 unit where you basically had bare bones or just the solid bones, well located. what are some of the challenges? I mean, you said the wiring was stripped. Um, I mean,
So on that one, it was pretty easy to see because when you drove up, it had been vacant for 3 years. So I knew going into that when it was, you could see where the water damage was. You could see what floors were rot. I mean, it was everything there was pretty much visible because over time period it had been gutted. But like the second deal I did, it was a 24 unit complex. It had only been vacant for about 6 months. But before I purchased it, there were two buildings there. One belonged to one church and one belonged to the other, and a local investor had split the property and given one building to a church and one to the other. Well, I bought one of those. And my lawyer, the surveyor, all said it was grandfathered in. And just in case somebody doesn't know, grandfathering means that it doesn't meet current code, but it met the code when it was built. Right. Therefore, you don't have to bring it up to either handicap or sprinklers, or it's grandfathered in. You can lose your grandfathering if certain things are changed to the property. Well, when those buildings were built, the setback was 25 feet. Setback is how far a building has to be away from the other for fire, so fire can't jump between. Setback today in Forsyth County, North Carolina, is 40 feet. So I bought this property, went to pull my building permits. Mr. Tabor, we have a problem. You can't get your building permits because you have a setback, which means you have to bring everything up to current code.
So you need to add 15 feet to your lot, huh?
So to add 15 feet to my lot, I had to buy the other building and tear it down. Took 18 months, $150,000 of unplanned funds, and it all could have been avoided. I tell people there's a few things I'll say during a speech or podcast. If you don't hear anything else, this is one of them. I never do a deal now unless I go to the zoning department, either via phone, email, or in person, and get a certified letter signed with letterhead saying that the property I am buying at this PIN number, or this lot number, this block number is zoned for this. Okay. Because had I had that, or had I tried to get that, I would have known before closing that there was an issue with the setback.
Right, right.
So, it's kind of that you make your money before you buy. You also lose your money before you buy.
Right.
And that's the due diligence process.
Right.
You being in insurance, you know this. A common mistake that people will miss on the P&L, on the expense side, is insurance is $1,000 a month. So they run all their numbers, and it's $1,000 a month. And they go to close, and they get closed, and then the bank comes in and says, "Oh, your deductible is currently $25,000, but it has to be $10,000. So your monthly payment goes from $1,000 to $1,400. Yep. For easy math, let's do $1,500. Now you've added $6,000 worth of unplanned expenses, and at a 10% cap rate, $6,000 deducts the value of your property, $60,000.
Right, right. No, and that is like you mentioned, just in the due diligence, make sure you have your numbers, and even that deductible thing. I've seen different programs just assume, whether it be a property manager program or a big lender program or something like that, where the deductible is like that. You said $25,000, and the investor was planning on a $5,000 deductible or a $10,000 deductible, and yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit of a surprise.
It increases the price. Well, too, I don't know in your area, but in North Carolina, aluminum wiring versus copper wiring, the insurance cost is 2 to 3 times more for aluminum than copper.
Yep. Now that's one that the insurance companies are definitely cracking down on and are a little excited about. And in something like that, you may run across somebody that's owned the property for years and years before the question was ever asked on an application, and the incumbent carrier is they've been happy because they've never had a claim, and the owner always paid the premium, so what's the problem here? But when you go
But now they're cracking down on that, and they're doing more inspections on multifamily.
right,
When I started out 11 years ago, I don't think I had a property inspection from an insurance company for the first 5 or 6 or 7 years.
right,
And now every time I do a property, there's an insurance inspection within the first 3 months.
right,
And then they
right,
send over a sheet of all the things that need to be done. Well, one of the insurance carriers, I won't name names, they've started requiring on stoves that those stove latches be put that connects the stove to the wall.
right.
It's not bad. They're $20 each plus install. But, I mean, at 50 units at $20 each, and
Yep.
you got to pay somebody, I mean, it's, $1,000, $2,000 to put those latches on.
Right, right. No, and it is just even carrier to carrier. They get kind of cranky about different things, and nobody. I don't think there's a really, or I haven't run across it yet, a real uniform underwriting guideline. But I think that definitely the aluminum wiring is a challenge.
Yes.
Have you actually run into one where have you purchased a property that had aluminum wiring and had to go about fixing it?
So the 56 unit that I purchased that was complete vacant had aluminum wiring, but I knew that going into it, and we did the pigtails,
Okay.
the little 6-inch or 8-inch copper attachments. But to do 56 units, to do all the plugs, the lights, and the light switches, it was like $58,000 to pigtail 56 units.
But you had that in your budget, right?
But I had it in my budget.
Okay. Yeah,
What I didn't have is I didn't have the insurance premium difference, but that didn't go up till a year, 2 years after I had it that I found out that I don't know if the insurance company just missed it or if there was some policy, some internal memo that, hey, let's start charging more for aluminum wiring than copper. But all the insurance companies I've talked to in the last year have said they charge more for aluminum than they do copper.
Even if you've had it pigtailed.
It's a little less if you've had it pigtailed, but it's still, even if you've had it pigtailed, it's still more than copper.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think there was a time in history when aluminum was cheaper than copper, and the contractors or builders were looking to save money and make their numbers work, so they were looking for the alternative wiring there, and aluminum won.
And aluminum won,
Yeah.
yes.
And it wasn't until
Some other issues to think about when you're buying a property in the due diligence side. So I spend most of my time, most of my efforts when doing a property is the due diligence, because a lot of times people will skip over some things, and most of this comes off my background. But who owns the fire hydrants? Every time I go out and talk to someone or talk to a group, will the town or the municipality or the county, the fire department? But that's the perception. But a property I bought, thankfully there was nothing wrong with them. It had 6 fire hydrants, and in the listing, the town listing, those fire hydrants were private. So if anything had gone wrong with them, I would have had to fix them to keep my insurance policy. And a fire hydrant's fairly expensive. I mean, it can be $4,000 to $6,000 to replace a fire hydrant.
So I'm assuming that based on where they were located was more the issue. They weren't like out in the public right of way or near the street.
They were on a paved road that
Really?
came into the complex, but that paved road,
It was private.
even though it had a green street sign on it, was considered a private road.
Gotcha. Well, that's another good thing to look for. What are some other things? I mean, we've talked a little bit about electrical and went down that for a little bit, but the water, the water or the fire hydrants, I wouldn't have thought to think about that.
Yeah.
What are some other issues you've run into, and some steps you take?
Rent rolls are useless. The rent roll is only a regurgitation, a reprinting, typing of what's on the lease. So a lease is normally 7 to 10 pages. A rent roll simply takes the name, the address, the amount, the security deposit, move in, move out, and puts that into a concise. But a rent roll does not mean that that's what somebody is actually paying or that they've paid it. Because just because you have a lease doesn't mean they've paid. It means they should be paying. And I learned this on my third deal. I bought a deal that was supposed to be bringing in almost $28,000 a month per the rent roll. Certified, had the CPA accounting there. The property was actually bringing in $7,500 a month. And
Wow.
the owner had played, fudged all his numbers.
That's a big gap from
It's a big
28
gap.
to 75. Yeah.
But a rent roll is, in my opinion, it's a good to see name to verify that tenant is there. But in my very humble opinion, having done this for 11 years now, the only way to verify cash flow on a property is bank statements. Because do you know what the IRS doesn't care about? They don't care if you inflate how much you make. They
Right.
care about if you cheat them on how much you made. So if a complex is only bringing in $50,000, but you put that it brought in $100,000, so it matches up to your fake rent roll,
Right.
the IRS doesn't care because you paid more taxes than you should have.
Right. Right.
So the only way that I will buy into that someone's numbers these days, if your complex is collecting $10,000 a month and your bank statement says it's collecting $7,000. So what I do in that situation, I say, okay, there's a $3,000 difference. We can either negotiate the price coming down because we're short $36,000 a year, 10% cap rate, that's $360,000. Or you can put $36,000, 12 months worth of payments over into an escrow account with an attorney. And at the end of each month, if I collected $10,000, you'll get your $3,000 back.
There you go, huh?
But if I only collect $7,000, I get to keep that $3,000.
So
You'll find out real quick how honest someone is.
I was going to say, what's the? Have you had anybody take you up on the deposit with the?
Absolutely.
Really?
And I've had people walk from deals and say, no, you mean this property's collecting $10,000 a month. Well, your bank statement says 7. If it's collecting 10, you have nothing to worry about because at the end of every month, you'll get your 3 back. And at that moment when they walked, you know what I knew? They had lied about how much money it was collecting.
Right. Right.
At $3,000 a month, 33% missing. That's hard money. That's not play money on a sheet. If you need that money to cover your mortgage and your management team and renovating, that means you got to come up with another $3,000 every month
Right.
to cover that shortfall.
No, and that's a big gap.
It's a big
30%.
gap.
Yeah, that's a big gap.
But even if you're at 10,000 and the bank statement shows 9,000, that's still $12,000 in a year. That's a pretty significant gap too.
Right. Right. Now you make a good point. The bank statements, and I think that just the the whole notion of or the way that the sale is set up. You've got the selling broker that's doing the pro forma, and that's always some flowery way things could be if everything aligned, and just look how much money you're going to make. And
Yep.
and if you start as that's the number rather than working to your own number with what's real, you're set for a big problem.
Run your numbers, run the best case scenario,
Right.
but operate off the worst case scenario. If you don't want to lose money and you don't want to put yourself in a bind, work from because they're working off the best case. They're giving you everything that they can to make it look as shiny as possible. If you work from the worst case, then maybe somewhere you meet in the middle, so you're at least protected a little bit. Maybe they get a little bit of what they want and you get a little bit of what you want. But most likely in flipping, you're buying a property that has some issues.
Right.
Because it has to have some type of issue for there to be enough meat on the bone for someone to get rid of it, and then for you to do what you need to do and resell it.
No, good point. let me ask you this, because I think the income side of things is fairly easy. Like you said, if you're at least seeing the bank statements, that's going to tell you, those are the numbers you're going to work with, right?
Right.
So let's talk about the expense side of things and your due diligence. Are there some? Can you talk a little bit about how you look at the capital expense that you're going to need? I mean, obviously, when you're flipping, we've talked about some of the condition of the property, but are there some specific things that you look for that are kind of more telling that you dig into more?
Yeah, I mean, the things the due diligence, you got your normal, what's the roof look like? What's the windows look what's the parking lot look like? The things you can see.
Mm-hmm.
In insurance, the alligatoring of parking lots where it's not broken up yet. It's not a trip hazard, but it looks like the back of an alligator and the asphalt's all cracked up.
Right.
At some point, an insurance inspector is going to walk in and say, "Hey, Darren, this has got to be replaced in the next 12 months or we're going to cancel your insurance."
Right. Trip and fall.
Trip and fall hazard.
Yep.
Any types of cracks in concrete sidewalks where there's more than a quarter inch lip, maybe half an inch, they're going to ask for that to be dug out and replaced. But the real issues in the due diligence outside of the financial side, when you get into the nuts and bolts, the building itself, is what you can't see. What's the property like? What's the area like? Because if you're going to turn a property and flip it, you got to get tenants in there, and the better the tenant, the more you can make. So, you can ask the manager, you can ask the owner, you can ask tenants, what's this place like on a Friday night? What's it like on a Saturday? Is this a safe area? And I found out that most people lie about that.
So how do you do your due diligence on that?
So I pull police reports.
All right.
Go back and pull 12 months or 24 months. Most, unless you're in a smaller area, most municipalities have police reports online.
Mm-hmm.
You Google the town or city police department, and you go in and you put the address in, and it pulls up all calls dispatched, all for that area, for that address. And then you just start looking around the area. Well, I mean, if you see a lot of, various types, loud music is one thing, but, drug dealing and robberies and violence, assaults, you've got more than a bad property on your hand. You
Right.
also have an area that you're going to have to deal with. And you can renovate a property, but it's really hard to renovate an area.
Right.
You can do it. You can do it, but then you gotta plan on hiring an off-duty policeman, security company to help with some of that. The other is sewage issues, backing up in toilets, backing up in bathtubs. I don't know what it is. If complexes I've bought over the years, you go into tenants. Hey, do you have a problem with any of your sewer? No. And I bought a 24 unit. It's been about 8 years ago, and I closed on a Friday afternoon. And that Friday night, I had to get like a Roto-Rooter type company out there. All the tenants on the bottom called, and they all had raw sewage in their bathtub and their toilets. And I went out there the next Monday, and I was like, hey, I talked to you, bring out my notes. You told me that you had no issues. Oh, well, the landlord told me if I told you about that issue that they'd evict me.
Yeah.
So I said, you intentionally lied? So it's like, it cost me, I had to go in the underneath. It was a flat slab foundation. So to fix the pipe that was crushed underneath the building with tree roots and time and pressure and rocks was almost $82,000 by the time I moved all the tenants out, cut a 3-foot ditch with jackhammer through the concrete, dug down 3 feet, had to pay to have the tenants placed somewhere else. I was there's got to be a way to figure this out. So I started going and pulling city complaints. The housing authority, or different areas have different names for it, but it's if you're in the rental market and your landlord won't fix your property, who do you call? It's normally
Yeah.
the county or the town. There's somebody you call and complain. They come out and inspect your unit, and they give the landlord normally 30 days to get it fixed before fines start. Do you know what I found when I pulled the city complaints for that property? Raw sewage, raw sewage, raw sewage, raw sewage.
Just a couple, huh?
Just a couple.
Yeah.
And had I done that before I bought the property, I would have caught an $82,000 problem.
Wow. And so you had to replace the main then from the building out to the street,
All the way out. Had to replumb the because of the concrete, the way it was, and where the pipes were, and the damage had to been done. We had to replumb from the units to the main line, and had to replace the main line from one end of the complex all the way out to the street. Now, half of that cost was having to move the tenants out and tear out the concrete and replace the pipe and put the concrete back. The plumbing was a good cost, but because the way the pipe ran down the center of the unit of the complex and the concrete had been poured on top, that was the only way to replace it.
Wow. That is a lesson that I'm sure any listener would definitely take to the bank when buying property.
Right?
Yeah. No, they
should.
And I've seen it here lately more often, and I've done it myself, where you have the line scoped. I don't know if you've run that, or is that something you instill in your practice?
So in the due diligence process, something like that would, in our area, to scope a pipe that size and that, you'd be at about $300 to $400.
Right.
So you could pay it out of pocket or pull the city complaints and look at them. I mean, in 10 minutes of looking at these complaints, I knew. Not only did I know the sewage issues, but I knew who the problem tenants were.
Right.
I knew what the wind. It gave me this amazing picture that I couldn't get by talking to anyone.
Right.
Here's another area to go pull. Go pull all the evictions. Go to the clerk of court, and you'll find out your tenant base. If they're like, Nathan's been living here for 2 years and Darren's been here for 4, and this rent roll and these leases look like these people have been here forever, and it's 40 units, and you go down and there's been 120 evictions on the property in the last 2 years. And all those 40 tenants, there's only 10 of them that have been there for more than a year, and everything else is a revolving door. Do you know what you have? You have a very unstable cash flow.
Right.
Because every time you evict someone, then you got to pay to go back in and renovate it, replace the flooring probably, and paint it, and you've lost the income from the unit, plus you've had to spend your time and money filing the eviction.
Yeah, and depending on the laws in your jurisdiction, that could linger. I know Oregon's getting more and more friendly with the tenant laws or the tenants side of the law there. And
as far as I know, it takes a minimum in most states of 60 days to get someone out.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. So if you were going to suggest one thing to a prospective multifamily real estate investor for due diligence, what would you say?
Yeah, the number one thing I would say is don't leave any stone unturned, because everything matters. Because you miss one of these things. I had a client a few months back that they couldn't get into a vacant unit. I mean, they couldn't get into an occupied unit. The person, worked third shift. They were never at home. And I was like, you did finally I went ahead and closed. There was nobody in the unit. All the copper had been stripped out. The HVAC inside had been, it was a demoed unit. Like it probably had water damage. Well, there was a $30,000 unplanned cost.
Right.
So I tell people, if you're buying a complex and there's that unit that you can never get into because the person's never home or they're always working or they're asleep, just go ahead and ask the owner to deduct the sales price by the worst case scenario. So if you think it's going to cost you $50,000 if a unit was burned out, then say My price is $1 million minus $50,000 because I can't get in that unit. You know what'll happen?
You're going to get inside the unit.
You'll get inside that unit.
Yeah.
And it's going to be bad, but it's not going to be $50,000 bad.
No, but it did force the issue there, and you did get what you needed, and you've uncovered, or you didn't leave the stone unturned. I like that.
Yeah. So the advice is, because this is where you make your money, and this is where you lose your money.
Mm-hmm.
If your renovation budget is off, I tell people always, if you do your renovation, add 20% to 30% on top, because there's going to be a rotten floor that you didn't catch. People walk around with me when I'm doing my due diligence. I take a little plug, one of those little $5 plug checkers from Home Depot or Lowe's that you plug it in and it lights up. Because I've bought units before where I checked a light. Oh, the light's, electrical works. And I come back and the whole right side of the unit is out. And I'm like, why didn't you say, oh, well, the landlord, the owner. So I check every plug.
Yeah.
Because to rewire units, $3,000 to $4,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sit down on every toilet. I close the seat. I sit down on every toilet and shake back and forth on the toilet to see if the floor underneath is rotten. Yep. Because it's $800 to $1,200 to replace that rotten floor.
Yep. Well, soft subfloor there, and if it's depending on how long it's been, it could be more than that. So that's good.
So the thing is, on that due diligence side, is it takes time, and it takes dedication and determination. It's hot. It's not fun. But if you're going to be serious about making money, you got to be serious about taking the steps to ensure what you're buying, that you know everything that you can possibly know, and that you do everything you can to plan for everything that could go wrong. No,
that's well said.
Because if you don't, who's going to pay for it? After you close, who's going to cover the shortfall? Do you think the bank's going to give you an extra loan? Do you think the owner's going to give you some of your money back? Think about this with your investors. Hey, Darren, you invested $100,000 with me, and I really messed up here, and I missed this. So can you invest another $50,000 with me so I can cover this?
Right.
How do you think that conversation is going to go?
Wouldn't go well. Would not go well. Yeah.
And if they do give it to you, you know what they'll never do again? They'll never invest with you again when they hopefully when they get their money back.
Right. Now all of the issues that you've it sounds like many of them you've experienced firsthand, which
unfortunately these are the failures, the things I missed.
Right.
And not that I'm like, oh, you're this guru or expert over here, but I don't see this stuff in any of the courses or classes out there that I've seen.
Right.
Because this is not the pleasant stuff. This isn't like, oh, do this and you'll make $1 million. This is, if you don't do this, you might lose $1 million.
Right. I'd say most of the stuff that I've seen and hear and discuss revolve around operating, net operating income, cap rates, market rate, value add, but not value protect. And I think that's kind of what you're in the due diligence. What you're really trying to do is protect yourself from something that's worse than worst case, right?
Yeah.
Know what that worst case is, so that you have a solid foundation for how you can make this property work to your plan. And
I like that value protect. I've never thought of it that way, but that is you're protecting yourself. You're protecting your investment. You're protecting the ability to make the money that you think you can make.
Well, that's good. Nathan, I really appreciate you taking us through, from my notes. I think the couple of things that I stand out to me is checking with the municipality, starting with those records, whether it be the zoning or the crime log or the eviction logs. Those are accessible, and they can identify immediately more of a condition of the property in the neighborhood right there. There can be some warning signs, and little or no cost. I think that's the big thing right there.
Just your time.
Yep. And then thanks for taking us through the physical things, especially the electrical and the plumbing things. I think those are, like you've mentioned, the things you can't see behind the walls. If you don't know and you don't know to ask, or whether it be the aluminum wiring or the fuses or the circuit breakers or the plumbing, certainly those are things that can add up in a hurry. And you mentioned the roof and windows and all that. I think those are great things for all the listeners and for any apartment or multifamily investor to keep in mind when they're out looking for another property. And I want to say thank you again for doing that. Where can the listeners go to find out more and learn more about you?
Yeah, so they can go to Nathan Tabor, and that's NathanTAB as in boy or.com. And then there's some links there to apartments or to real estate. And I don't know if I provided to you or not. I have a free book PDF that somebody can get that I can send you a link if you want to, that you can put in, or they can grab it on the website, whichever way. Or I'm on Facebook or LinkedIn just under Nathan Tabor.
Got it. Well, yeah, if you'd send me that link, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes.
Yes.
And again, Nathan, I want to say thanks for taking the time to talk today. I've learned a bunch, and appreciate you taking the time, and hope we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on your show.
All right. For our listeners, if you like the show, share it with someone you know. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.